I'll start again. My name is Julie Sherry and I work at the Stand Up to Racism National Office, and I'm going to be hosting this session today, which we actually had to change the name of because it started out as being called Refugees Welcome, Stop the Scapegoating, Don't Let Them Divide Us and Get Braverman Out. So we've done one of those things already, which is good. So as I was saying, we've got some speakers online and some speakers here on the panel in the room with us. We're going to have some contributions from those panel speakers, and then we'll open up to the floor for discussion. So do have a think while the speakers are talking what you might want to bring into the discussion. We should have some time for contributions, and people will have 3 minutes each. For those online, after 3 minutes we will mute you, just because we have to kind of get through as many people we want to get into this discussion as possible, because we know that people have a lot of experience in being out on the streets organising to show solidarity with refugees, and we want to hear from across Britain and internationally. So I'm just going to check with our tech team. Do we have Mark Sawatka with us, ready to go? So I just want to give an extra special welcome to Mark Sawatka, PCS Union General Secretary, and a big thank you really in solidarity from us to the PCS Union for everything that they've done in the past year or so, you know, from the action that was taken by the union that led to stopping of the pushbacks in the Channel, to another victory that I think we saw last week with the campaigning that PCS and Care for Cali and many others have been involved in fighting to stop the Rwanda deportations plan. Now obviously we know that the government are trying to come back harder and trying to push this through and circumvent the law, but the fact that they were forced back on that issue is testament, I think, to the campaigning of the PCS Union, Care for Cali, and all the many anti-racist activists across the country that have been out on the streets. And
when we have a Home Secretary who describes men and women marching for peace and for a ceasefire as hate marches, it is an outrage. When she calls on the far right to mobilise, it is a dangerous moment. When we see the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of Islamophobia, the rise of attacks on migrants, we should worry, because these are not isolated incidents, but it is a political campaign led from the very top to destabilise our communities and to sow division. And I think that what this is all leading up to is a general election that will be the most vicious and worrying that we will have seen in decades. We are going back to the Enoch Powell River of Blood speech. We are going back to periods where the Tories think there will be votes in division, anti-migrant rhetoric, and of course, as we know, it isn't going to stop there. When the government tells us next week we can have tax cuts in order to have benefit cuts, we know that this division will not end with racism. It will seep into dividing those at work from those on benefits, those who are pensioners and those who are working age, those in the public sector, those in the private sector. It is a political strategy driven by the likes of Suella Braverman, the Daily Mail and others, in order to seek dreadful division in our communities, and that has to be a worry for all of us. That is why conferences like today and 850 registering is a phenomenal effort on a Sunday morning. It is essential, because our job has to now be to get unity in the workplace, in the trade union movement and in our communities in order to confront the division that's coming. And that is why, briefly, Julie, I did want to say that the victory that we've had in the courts over Suella Braverman and what that means, I think, are essential that we build on that work and we learn some of the lessons. I want to pay tribute to our members in the Home Office, often maligned, sometimes within the Labour movement, but the truth is, if PCS had not unionised in the Home Office, particularly in the border force where our density is so high, people who have often pilloried and attacked, if it hadn't been our union organising there would have been no legal challenges funded by us on the Rwanda policy, because this started with workers telling their union they were not prepared to go to work to push women, men and children back in the Channel at almost certain risk of death. And it was because we organised those workers and that we took, I think, the groundbreaking decision to reach out and say it's not just about those workers, it is about refugees, it is about racism, and it is about people fleeing all sorts of oppression, that we can make common cause. I pay tribute to Care for Calais, Detention Action, and the thousands of activists around the country who all stood together to ensure that we could win in court. But the win in court required brave decisions. I can tell you that even though we won in court, our union has already received our first bill of £350,000, massive commitment that we made in order to stand with refugees and stand up against this dreadful stuff. And whilst that's a lot of money, the effect of that has been the pushback policy was stopped. Let's not forget that this started with Priti Patel wanting to turn boats back in the channel. We stopped it. We then had the disgraceful Manston detention centre where people should be in and out in 24 hours, where people were there for weeks in horrible conditions, threatened legal action. We broke the logjam. Now we know that we have won in the Supreme Court because of the brilliant legal work done by Duncan Lewis and the work of charities, and that is really important. But it is a legal victory and the battle is far from over. And that is why our union is now wanting to move on, to unite the movement, to support the strategy that us and Care for Calais are pushing, which is a policy of safe passage that allows people to come to this country, make claims for asylum through safe and legal routes. And we say that if that can be done for people from Ukraine and from Hong Kong, it can be done for people fleeing war and poverty from around the rest of the world. And the Labour Party wants to do that policy at the moment. So I think everybody at this conference will write to their Labour MP, because a policy of safe passage is the way to break the model of the criminal gangs. Not by believing Europol or a tough policy with the French is going to stop it. When people are desperate, they will do desperate things to come to our country. So I want to finish, Julie, by saying this. That was a legal victory, and that was a legal victory of a team of people coming together. And I pay tribute to every single member of that team and everyone who played a role in it. But whilst the legal battles were going on, other battles were taking place that were equally important. Whether they were in Scotland, whether they were in Merseyside, whether they were at Portland, whether they were at Llanelli in West Wales. When migrants were housed in hotels and the far right was mobilised to give these people the most hostile of receptions imaginable, it was to stand up to racism, trade union councils, trade union activists and anti-racists who mobilised to outnumber the fascists in every single time. You cannot overestimate the importance of that. Legal victories are great, but it is the battle now in communities, in unions and in workplaces that will be the pivotal one as to whether we can turn around this tide of hostility to migrants and have a better future or not. And my finishing message, therefore, with the delegation that we've got to this conference today, is that sometimes when you challenge this narrative, it is difficult. It is true that in PCS, where members were made aware, because we didn't do this quietly, we have blazoned this on all our communication channels for months and months and months, we had some kickback. Like any union, we will have members who are Tories and we will have members who have some different political views to the leadership. But we were prepared to take on that internal dissent and explain why we were doing the right thing. But it means difficult conversations in workplaces. It means difficult conversations in the shops, on the streets, and outside the hotels. But I tell you what, if we don't have those conversations and we don't do the mobilisation and we don't unite people, the run-up to the election could make an already dreadful situation much worse. So on behalf of my union, and speaking here for the last time as PCS General Secretary, I want to commit, not just myself, but I believe PCS, under the leadership I hope we will elect in the coming weeks, to continue to work with Stand Up to Racism and to try and fund your activities, to continue to support activists and people right around the country, to basically say, all we want is a very simple thing. It is every man and every woman and every child, wherever they come from, whatever their colour, whatever their religion, whatever their social status, deserves to live a life free of discrimination, hatred and prejudice. That is our mission, and I hope our union and this movement can fight like never before to make sure it happens. Thanks very much.
As the housing contractors as well. One of the hotels, for example, that's been housing people seeking asylum is making millions just to house around 100 people. And the number of the number of people in these hotels are actually not significantly huge number of people as it's made in the media and as it's made and accusations made by the right-wing groups. They're talking about hundreds of people in hotel accommodations. Usually it's around 50 people, and the maximum that we have seen in Scotland was 170 people, where a hotel accommodation is hosting people. And while people are in the hotel accommodation, usually these hotels are placed in locations and areas which is very isolated and in communities where ongoing issues were already being experienced, such as poverty, such as local community centres being shut. So it's an extremely, really smart move by the Home Office to place people into communities where there's already an anger in the communities of why is my local community centre being shut? Why am I in the waiting queue for the GP appointment or for a hospital appointment for many months? So it's an actually very smart tactic by the Home Office to create tension within the communities, and really smart but really worrying tactic. And when people are in these hotel accommodations, they are giving around £9.30 on a weekly basis. And they are supposed to be surviving on this amount to buy clothes, to go on travel. And I don't know if you have seen, but in Scotland we were leading a campaign for free bus travel for people seeking asylum. And we successfully managed to win the campaign after 2 years. And hopefully, as of next year, April, people seeking asylum will get free bus travel across Scotland on the public transport. And I know that there are some organisations down in England and in Belfast as well who are trying to duplicate this. And I would say at least this is the least thing we can do to make the life of people who are in the asylum process in a system which is inhumane and cruel, and in a system which is created to dehumanise people and treat people less than a human being, where they are not allowed to work, which is something that we have been campaigning for, again, for a very long time with the Lift the Ban Coalition. I know that the PCS union we've been working together in Scotland with this, and together with other unions as well, with the National Lift the Ban Coalition. And I urge everyone to join the coalition, and if you're even a union member, or if you work in a business, or if you're involved, if you want your organisation to be involved, I would really urge you to check out the Lift the Ban Coalition to see what you can do so that people seeking asylum can have the right to work and at least live an independent life in a temporary, in a situation where they are not respected, and in a situation where their human rights are not being valued. And I would like to end by saying that we have a lot of work to do. The increase in right-wing activities are very worrying and very scary, and especially for those people who are dispersed into communities where they don't know the language or where they don't know the system, and they are met by hostility. And this is what's been happening in places like Erskine, what Julie mentioned earlier, where people are placed in hotel accommodation, and rather than being welcomed by the local community, you have right-wing, and you have, I would call them fascist in some cases, who go outside the hotel and chant horrific things. And this is how people are welcomed in the country. And this is horrifying to see. I don't want to live in communities where we constantly see the increase in right-wing activities, where we constantly see that every single thing is blamed on people seeking asylum and refuge, or if you look a little different, then you are the problem, and you are the result of the ongoing issues in the country. And I was speaking with one of my friends the other day. Whenever we talk about asylum seekers or refugees, we immediately talk about the housing crisis and people, and what about our own people? These are the narratives that we get seen, and these are the problems that we already had in our communities, such as the housing crisis in Glasgow. When you look at it, it's significant. But this housing crisis hasn't been created by refugees. There isn't a housing crisis, and it's a responsibility of the council, and it's a responsibility of the government. But again, as always, it gets blamed on refugees, that all of a sudden the housing crisis came out of nowhere. And these are the narratives that we need to change in the communities. And as individuals, we have a huge role to play in this. And I think it's our role to, when we speak with our neighbours, or when we speak within our unions or in our workplaces, or even if you're standing in a bus stop, which is something we love, and it's something we love in Scotland. We always rant about the weather, but maybe now we can rant about the government. Is the narrative that we need to change and talk about the root causes of these problems. And I think that this is why the importance of having community development and community organising and solidarity, to change the narratives, to actually critically think about the root causes of the problems, and to look at how we can mobilise within our communities, as we did in Kenmare Street, when we said these are our neighbours, let them free, let them be. And also we have been doing in Erskine and many other places where we say that the problem is not people seeking asylum and refuge. The problem is the racist government we have, the government who is constantly oppressing its own people for the will of and for the need of more great power for themselves. So I'm sending solidarity to everyone, and please check out the Lift the Ban Coalition, and let's keep fighting until we have a humane and a welcoming asylum and immigration system. Thanks, everyone.
To be here. Just a few words. Kev Kelly, I'm Steve Smith. Just a few words on what we do. You may know already, but just to fill in the background. The name is Kev Kelly, which people think probably means that we operate exclusively in France. We don't these days. We do still retain a presence in France. Every day our volunteers go out providing support to somewhere in the region of 2,500 refugees spread between Dunkirk and Calais, providing shoes, food, clothing, activities like phone charging, English lessons, hairdressing, you name it. But every day also across in UK, 365 days a year, around 800 volunteers provide support to thousands of asylum seekers living in hotels. We currently cover some 200 of the 400 hotels involved, along with Wethersfield and Napier Barracks, and of course the Bibby Barge. I'll talk briefly about what's happening in Calais. Winter is coming. I said before, some 2,500 refugees are sleeping rough, under tents, under tarpaulins, under trucks, under nothing but maybe trees. The numbers are currently high. That's because the weather is preventing channel crossings, so the population is growing. Note, I said the weather. For all the government's wishful thinking, deterrence has nothing to do with it. Evictions by the French police are frequent, and when refugees are evicted, they're bussed to a location many miles away, and in the meantime their tents and sleeping bags are confiscated and destroyed. We therefore desperately try to replace these items just to keep people alive. And at this time of year, the provision of coats is ultra important. At least those can't be confiscated. So right now we're running a Coats for Calais campaign in partnership with Stand Up to Racism. So please be aware of this. We have a desk out there with a leaflet, so it would be lovely if you could pick those leaflets up. Let's move to this side of the channel. I'm going to start with Wethersfield. We strongly oppose the use of Wethersfield for housing asylum seekers. It's a quasi-detention centre with high security fences, guards, 24/7 surveillance and restrictions over access and exit. Residents are virtually prevented from leaving the camp by any other means than one of the 8 minibuses on site. I say 8, they've only managed to recruit 6 drivers. Leaving on foot is difficult. The nearest village is 1.5 miles away, and the nearest town, Braintree, is about 8 miles away. Roads are narrow with no pavements. The administration of the base is becoming increasingly chaotic. As the population grows, and we believe that there are currently some 500 residents, and the number is set to rise to 1,700. Already the queues for meals are taking over an hour, and by the time people get to the serving hatch, they've often run out of food. Health problems are endemic. There have been outbreaks of scabies, detection of TB, including one active case of TB, and increasing mental health concerns. For over a £1 million contract covering 18 months, there appears to be just a single nurse practitioner on site with occasional visits by a GP and no mental health support. Shocking. The combination of these events has led to hunger strikes and protests. The Home Office said there were no hunger strikes. They denied that there were hunger strikes, despite the fact that we as a charity had filmed of a resident falling unconscious through hunger, with one of the security staff standing over him saying, "It's not my problem. He gets 3 meals a day. If he chooses not to eat them, that's up to him." It was down to one of our staff based in Manchester who called the ambulance to respond to this base, which is in Essex, and the guy was, was kept in hospital overnight. Our challenge to Wethersfield, our legal challenge, is based on a couple of assertions. One is, we believe that the physical confinement of residents has stopped them having their liberty. They are segregated from the community, and because of the makeup of the resident population, almost all from ethnic minority backgrounds, this is effectively racist. Failure to comply with the accommodation suitability criteria set by the Home Office stipulates that victims of torture, trafficking, modern-day slavery and mental health problems should not be accommodated in barracks and barges, and yet we see this all the time at Wethersfield. It's going to cost us. The government has deep pockets. We have a fundraiser online with Crown Justice. I urge you, please, of course, please take a look at that, because it is going to be a costly exercise, although we will get cost capping, I hope. But I think it's something that needs to be done. It's our opinion that the legal challenge against Wethersfield will also impact on the outrageous use of the Bibby barge to effectively warehouse asylum seekers. With 500 set to be crammed into a boat that was only built to house 220, the overcrowding will be off the scale. At least with Wethersfield, residents can walk outside the barrack blocks whenever they want to. You can't do that on a barge. Those on the Bibby won't be able to do that. They will be effectively let out for meal times. Yes, there's a gym on board. It currently has 2 running machines, a rowing machine and a static multi-gym. My experience with multi-gyms is that you can usually take about 4 people at a time. So 7 people could have machines out of 500 on board. Hardly sufficient. And the only way out is via the minibuses. They will take residents into the local town. But when you're only given £9 a week for subsistence, that's not going to go very far on a trip into town. The government has often said that the Bibby barge was successfully used elsewhere. It cites Germany, it cites the Netherlands. There was an undercover reporter, got a job on board as a security staff member in the Netherlands, and I've got a couple of quotes from him. They're pretty telling. First one: the longer I work on the Bibby Stockholm, the more I worry about the safety on the boat. Between exclusion and containment, I encounter so many defects and feel so much tension amongst the prisoners that it no longer seems to be a question of whether things will get completely out of hand here, but when. And the second quote: I couldn't stand the way the prisoners were treated. The staff become like that because the whole culture there is like that, inhuman. They don't see the residents as people with a history, but as numbers. And we've already seen that before in Manston, and we're starting to see it in Wethersfield. I'd like to touch briefly on the subject of homelessness amongst refugees. Until recently, I'm sorry if you already know this, but many don't. Until recently, asylum seekers who'd received refugee status had the right to remain, had 28 days from the point of notification in which to move from their asylum hotel to get a job or to sign up for a universal credit, to a bank account, to sign up with a GP. All difficult, time-consuming things, particularly if English isn't your first language. In recent months, the rules were changed. The 28-day ticking clock now starts from the point of decision, not the point of notification. It can take days, if not weeks, particularly with people being moved between hotels, to communicate the decision to the asylum seeker, and all the time the clock is running down. The worst case we've heard is a refugee who received 24 hours notice before being evicted from the hotel. Shockingly, this is creating an epidemic of homelessness, and refugees are finding themselves out on the streets, jobless, with no access to universal credit. The Home Office is effectively transferring its own problems onto local councils and charities. Recently, and I'm sure this is no coincidence, Suella Braverman described homelessness as a lifestyle choice and stated that it should be illegal for charities like ours to distribute tents. You may have noticed a little throwaway line in her speech, many of whom are from overseas. We know who she was pointing at. She knew damn well what she was doing. She was trying to preempt early the concerns that tented camps of refugees were springing up all over the country. 30 tents were counted in Hyde Park a couple of weeks ago, I was told. Finally, to Rwanda. Is it a safe country? Well, the critical legal point doesn't hinge on it being a safe country per se, but whether it's safe for refugees. But before we look at whether it's safe for refugees, let's look a little bit about the safety in the round. Go back to the 1990s, 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus killed in effectively a genocide. To this day, some 200,000 Rwandans remain in DRC as refugees. Last year, some 6,500 Rwandans fled across the border as refugees, and the year before it was over 13,000. Over 40 Rwandans applied for refugee status in the UK since 2020. The Rwandan Defence Minister, General James Kabarebe, has been named by the UN as effectively directing something called M32. M32 is a militia organisation accused of killings, rapes and other atrocities across the border in the DRC, supported by the Rwandan armed forces. Bizarrely, Paul Kagame, the president of this so-called democratic country, has been president for 23 years. He's obviously very popular. As well as extrajudicial killings, disappearances and torture of opposition members, the British police have had to warn Rwandan expatriates in Britain that they are being targeted by Rwandan security forces for assassination. Anyway, but it's not about that, is it?
Sorry.
It's about whether it's safe.
Sorry.
30 seconds. Whether it's safe for refugees. And the key about that is reform. You've heard the expression on the TV many times. I'm sure we hadn't heard of it before the last week. This is whether asylum seekers will be returned to their host country by the Rwandan courts. The courts are not independent, they're leaned on heavily by the government, and we know the statistics that there are over 100 cases of reform that have been identified. Some of those even happened since the UK government signed the agreement with Rwanda. But it looks like the Tory government is about to declare Rwanda safe legally. So therefore we have refugees who have been declared to be illegal immigrants, and an unlawful policy that may be deemed lawful if only Rwanda can be deemed safe. Frankly, shocking. Thank you very much for your support. Before I leave the stage, I'd just like to say there's a vigil on the 14th of June, the Adriana, with 750 refugees sank off the coast of Greece. Over 600 people died at sea. On the 14th of December, Kefakali, in conjunction with our allies Amnesty International, holding a vigil at the Embassy of Greece. You might be interested. There are these outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. What in there that's really important to cover. Our next speaker, we're delighted to introduce, is Chantal Lunt, who's from Merseyside BLM. Fantastic to have you, Chantal.
Thank you. I should also say I'm from Merseyside Alliance for Racial Equality, and I'm a lecturer and PhD researcher too. And I want to start off by talking about Friday, February the 10th. You can probably hear from the accent where I'm from. But where I was on Friday, February the 10th was I was in a club called District doing a Black History tour to students from Northumbria University. And I was talking about Charles Watton, who was one of the first commemorated lynchings that happened in Liverpool, and he was a black soldier at a time post World War I when there was an economic downturn and there was hostility towards soldiers of colour who have fought and died in the war. And similar narrative, they're taking all our jobs, they're coming over here, a lot of working class people blame them. And there was a lot of violence towards those people on the streets, and Charles Watton was chased to the Mersey with a crowd that contained police officers and ended up being lynched in the Mersey. And there were loads of incidents of white soldiers standing outside hotels and places that black soldiers were screaming, trying to get them out, trying to cause mayhem and set fire to those places. And at this point, we knew the far right planned to go to that hotel, the Suite Hotel in Knowsley. And I remember saying to the students, isn't it interesting that we're 100 years down the line, the story hasn't changed, but the community has. It's no longer black people, but it is refugees. They've just changed, they've just shifted that hate-filled narrative. And I said, I hope it's not a similar case, I hope the same thing doesn't happen. And I remember going off, because I was meant to have my first week off in about 2 years, and literally just going online and seeing what happened, and realising that not much indeed had changed. And for many in Merseyside, that was a wake-up call, that, you know, quite often we pride ourselves in being a red wall and being this safe haven and opposing the far right and all those fabulous things that make us really proud as Scousers. But for years, people like myself have been saying, actually, we need to really criticise that, because while Liverpool is really strong and is a left stronghold, the far right won't target Liverpool first. The far right poke at the edges of our city, they poke at Merseyside, and that's been something that I've really struggled to get people to understand. Tommy Robinson came to our city in about 2019, and the only bit of Merseyside that he got a hero's reception was Heighton in Knowsley. Heighton, the same place where Anthony Walker was murdered all those years ago. And I, as someone who lives in Knowsley and someone who's a town councillor in Knowsley, have known this for years and been saying it again and again and again. They will push at the edges of our city. They won't come for the heart, they will come for the edges. So it was a wake-up call, and it was a time when a lot of people felt really, really worried. Like, has the narrative shift? Do they outnumber us? Because there were a lot of them on the streets. And yet they caught us on the back foot. But what my organisation did, with a lot of support from Stand Up to Racism, was we convened around 100 anti-racist groups, and we got everyone together and we were like, we need to do a demonstration, we need to stand against this, we need to show them that they're not outnumbered. We organised it in a week, and that week off, I'll be honest, went out the window. That didn't exist anymore. But we organised it in a week, and in that week we got so much intimidation from the far right. We got told they were organising a counter demonstration. They tried to put the fear of God into us, and fear can do a lot to you when you're getting told that there's going to be violent far right thugs busting from all over the country coming to your city. And I'll be honest, as I walked up to the George's Hall with a group of young people with me, because people had brought their families, I was a little bit worried about what I would see when I turned that corner. And you cannot imagine my relief when I saw this tiny little crowd of fascists literally surrounded by the left. They couldn't even be heard. And that was only on one side. On the other side, we literally filled the grounds at the George's Hall, and we outnumbered them at least 1,000 to 1. And that was the kind of thing that warms my heart, because you do worry, do you know what I mean, when they're saying that, you can't sit there and think, God, what is actually happening? So that was a really affirming moment. And this week we've had a few affirming moments. So we've had the Rwanda policy, as was mentioned, booted out and ruled unlawful. We've had Suella booted out and sacked, and I can't say that without smiling. It brings me so much joy. But I've got to be honest, you know, like Lord Voldemort, her evil spirit remains, and everything she stood for is still there. And that's the bit that we've got to challenge, because what she has sown is a hate-filled and divisive narrative. And what she's done is she's made racism palatable. She's a brown-skinned woman, which confused so many people. You know, people call her like, no, she's not one of us, but so many people were confused by that. This brown-skinned woman spewing palatable racism, and she made that palatable. And it will take us years to undo that legacy that she has left, and that's the issue. That is what we're going to be fighting. It'll take us years to clear up the mess that she's left. And Daniel spoke earlier, I noticed Daniel speaking as I came in, and he spoke about Nigel Farage going on I'm a Celebrity. Now, I remember when politicians wouldn't even stand on a platform with Nigel Farage. So the fact that he is now on mainstream television tells you how mainstream the far-right narrative has gone. And I agree with previous speakers who say we've never seen it this bad. We see them on GB News. We've got the likes of Piers. We've got the likes of Lawrence Fox. These real celebrities of the far-right who essentially fuel the fires of hate. And in my opinion, Suella Braverman's talk and her hate-filled speeches are no different to what the far right were doing in Knowsley when they were posting leaflets that contained lies through the letters of residents to get them riled up. And in my opinion, she should be facing charges for inciting hate. Now, I was in Asylum Link, which is an organisation that supports asylum seekers, on Friday, and you know, it's really you can kind of feel the fear when you're in a room. It's heartbreaking when you're in a room with people who just have been dehumanised to the point that like people don't even see them anymore, see the individual, see the doctor, the nurse, the community leader who they were before they came here. It's just asylum seeker, it's just dehumanised and takes away every bit of that person, replaced by a label. And I was doing a little talk with them, and I could feel, you know, the stuff that I felt in February in the room, that feeling of we're hated, we're isolated, we're outnumbered, we're alone. And I kind of told them what I'm going to tell you. That feeling, it does exist, and we've all got to acknowledge it. It does exist, and it's right there, and it's palatable. But it is just a feeling, and it's a feeling that they want us to have. They want us to be sat there. They want us to be paralysed by our fear, by our doubt. They want to threaten us. They want to come at us for standing up for what we know is right. And it's there if you look up. It's there if you look up at a parliamentary level, if you look at who's ruling us, if you look at all these key players. But it's not there when you look at a grassroots level, like when you look in this room today. I've had so many of those turn the corner moments recently. And one of the most recent ones, I'm going to tell you that quickly because I've got about a minute left, about two of the most recent ones I have. The first one was when I went to the ceasefire big demo in London last week. And again, we were on a coach coming from Liverpool with a load of unionists, there were kids on the coach. As we're on this coach, the videos are going round to the far right. And I'm worried for the kids. I'm thinking, oh God, what are we going to get off this bus to? I'm thinking, what are we going to do? And kind of when you're thinking that, there's part of you that's just like, do you know what? I'm just going to fight. Whatever happens, I'm going to go for it. And then I remember, like, we must have been 10 to 20 miles out of London. And I'm just looking next to us, and there's these massive coaches that are alongside us. And I'm looking at these coaches because we had our Palestine flag on the back. All these coaches have got Palestine flags. We literally came into London in a convoy with about 30 coaches, and I was like, what? We got off the coach, and there were just millions of people in this. I had this little boy with me, who was my friend's little boy, and he was clinging to me getting off the coach because he had seen the videos that everyone had seen. And then the minute he got into the crowd, he went, we outnumber them 1,000 to 1, Shannon. I was like, we do. And that is people power. The second moment like that I've had was in Parliament. I was in a Peace Talks event in Parliament on, oh God, maybe Tuesday, the same day that the ceasefire vote was going through. And I listened to this impassioned speech by the ambassador to Parliament. While we are in Parliament, I can hear the noise of the people outside Parliament. And as we walked outside and that vote went through, you could see at least 6,000 people making their voices heard. 6,000 people who've been threatened with losing the job, told it was unlawful, told they were on the wrong side of history, but know in their heart that they are on the right side of history to call for a ceasefire. And they have tried to pass every act, every legislation, every piece of paper to criminalise us, to tell us that we're wrong, but we turn up anyway, because we know that when we are older and we are looking at our grandkids, we want to say that we fought tooth and nail to change what is happening now. We stood together and we said no. We have had wins this week that we thought that we wouldn't have. We can do this, but only if we stand at a grassroots level, stop waiting for them up there, unite as a community, turn up, show out, turn out every time. Every time the far right raise their heads in numbers, we turn up on the street in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times the numbers and tell them no, not today, not tomorrow, not any day.
Fantastic, Chantel. Thank you. Thanks to all our panel speakers.
South Wales from Swansea, but I'm part of Stand Up to Racism Wales. I wanted to speak about Llanelli situation, and I'm sort of sorry to bring the mood down a little bit, because obviously there's some brilliant examples here which people will talk about of success of fighting the far right and the racist. But Llanelli is a warning for us in terms of the defeat, serious defeat about what's happened there. Just briefly, Home Office had a plan to bring asylum-seeking families to a hotel there. There was a massive hate campaign set up by the racists and the fascists, but really it started with the fact that it was the fact that the council there and the politicians did not speak for the refugees and speak for the asylum seekers by starting saying that the asylum seekers and refugees are welcome here. So, the whole sort of situation started from there on, with the local hate campaign then being set up by a local individual with a public meeting called against the asylum seeking families, refugees arriving, followed by a terrible demonstration being called against refugees. Shamefully, my own union branch secretary being part of that demonstration, and somebody like me who is one of the black members there, equalities officer, being told by that person that I was on the wrong side in terms of supporting the refugees and asylum-seeking families coming there. So what I want to say is that it was a brave campaign fought by local Stand Up to Racism activists, anti-racist activists, and individual union members, but not enough was done to mobilise our side in the big numbers that people have spoken about in the successful campaigns held, where the fascists and the racists and the far right have been defeated. We fought a good fight, including a number of counter demonstrations, which I think were absolutely right to be organised in terms of trying to really get the racists and the far right off. The hate camp actually set up outside the hotel where the plan was for the families to come. And it was simply not, some people have sort of said that we did the wrong thing by doing that. I would say it's simply not the case. We were absolutely right in all the counter mobilisations we called for, even if we were outnumbered, to call out the fascists and the racists for what they stand for. So I think the lesson of Llanelli is that we always have to start by saying the refugees are welcome here, the asylum seeker families are welcome here, no matter where they're going to be coming, whether it's the hotels or elsewhere, because to do anything else is to give the green light to the racists and the fascists. And obviously we know the hostile environment comes from the Tories, but it fed right into the family, in the situation in Llanelli, and yeah, it was a defeat for us, and that is a really serious lesson for us to learn.
Lincolnshire stand up to racism, and it's Lincoln Trades as council as well. Since February, we've had to organise against successive demonstrations and marches by the far right. Some of them in Skegness, some of them in Lincoln, and some up at the RAF Scampton. And beginning of February, as Lincolnshire didn't have any as anti-racist organisations, they didn't have a stand up to racism. We were absolutely horrified because there was between 200 and 300 fascists marched through Skegness, and there wasn't an opposition to them. So that was really the spur to launch stand up to racism. Shortly after that, they organised a demonstration in Lincoln. They were hoping to build a base in Lincoln. They got about 50, shoved off into a back street. We got about 200, and we successfully marginalised them. They then tried to come back, and they had even smaller numbers, and we had about 150, and we managed to actually keep them off the high street, which is what they wanted to do. But Llanelli is a real a warning for us, because RAF Scampton is becoming a focus for them, because the Home Office are planning to put 2,000 refugees there, and there has been a really vicious racist campaign from the locals in Scampton, but they haven't had the confidence to actually start to build a camp, but the fascists have, and they've now built a permanent camp outside the main gates at Scampton. And what we've got is what we've got is we've got a permanent fascist camp there. They are hoping to actually follow the same type of a model as Llanelli, and that is the danger for us. And what you've got in terms of the locals, they are quite happy to come out with the racism, but they, at this point in time, they are not joining the Nazis. But the Nazis are hoping to have that as a focus and to build a national campaign around Scampton.
That's great, thank you.
One of the most pivotal movements we have seen here in terms of fighting the fascists. And I just wanted to give a bit of background to that. It was quickly started off by a local group of racists who got hijacked by a patriotic alternative, and quickly Stand Up to Racism, Paisley Trades Council, Clydebank Trades Council, and individual kind of activist groups from around the area quickly gathered, and we've been mobilising there every week for the last 8 months, and we have beaten the back of Homeland and Patriotic Alternative every time they've come down. One of the most important things from that is that Homeland are not coming back anymore. We've managed to defeat them, but what we have to realise is the dynamic that's happened there has happened because of local SNP councillors, the MSP and MPs, who have quickly jumped on the back and talked about local concerns and X, Y and Z. And actually what we have to understand is that any working class community issue is only going to be solved with a joint united force between working class people, refugees and anti-racist movements, because we can't separate these issues. If you look at Glasgow right now, as Peanut had said, lots of refugees have been placed into hotels. Glasgow's homelessness team has been cut by 5 million this year. The housing team has also seen massive cuts to it. So what we're going to see is another high level of refugees being placed in hotels, and the fascists will come back to every single hotel. So it's very important that we do build these movements, grassroots movements, and attack every fascist movement that's going to come to a hotel, because we can do it, we've done it, and I'm very proud to say that we've done that in Erskine. I'd like to say that it's also not just been a full of tag, it's been a really fun time, controversially. We've got a carnival atmosphere there with the singing, dancing, football, Arabic lessons, English lessons. We are covering a whole host of things, so we've seen the creativity of the movement as well come through that. And just to finish, one of the most proudest moments for myself during that was that our friends from the hotel also led and supported the chants and the march against atrocities that are happening in Gaza right now. So we need to continue building these, because I remember when Bennett saying previously that they are going to come to any hotel where they can, so we have to be prepared and ready to mobilise the trade union movements and our local activist movements, because they'll come to any hotel and we need to be there to fight them with fire. So solidarity from Glasgow.
On the fact that as people coming from a leftist politics, it's important to notice how much the EU and the UK obviously are actively keeping out of the conversation the root causes of migration. It's particularly evident right now in the past few weeks with the horrors of an imperialist war that is very much an extractive war, similarly to all the others that are causing the migrations in the first place. And I specifically want to make a comment on Italy, simply because I grew up there. And whilst the rhetoric is very much aligned with the one that we can see here, Italy is also a country where, due to its fascist history and the way that politics today is echoing that fascist history, is very much in complete denial of its colonial past. And that is something that is very active every day and is sort of creeping into common sense and conversations, as well as the great replacement theory narrative. These days, there's been a deal put forward from Italy with Albania to host, I don't remember the exact number, but it was something insane, an insane number of migrants from off the coast of Libya, from Italy, and to Albania. And that deal has very much this very similar outline as the Rwanda plan. So it's looking like the same. This narrative of pushing the spreading the problem and not wanting to deal with neither the root causes nor actual solutions is very much taking off. At the same time, as I mentioned, the EU keeps throwing millions to the port guards in Libya and fueling the same problems that imprisons the migrants in Libya. A specific, possibly a good example from Bologna, the city I grew up in, which, by the way, is being priding itself for being a very progressive city, kind of an exception in Italy. And despite that's historically true, it's obviously just an illusion in many cases. And I haven't looked up the translation, and I should have, but basically we have these things called
because the rump of our racist group is threatening to march down to the port this morning, so we had to be there. But I hope that you can share our pride that we felt at a public meeting in Portland this week, when, although some of our activists on Portland are still taking flack from individual racists on the island, the refugees who were at the meeting, I know are part of the meeting, told us that since they were forced back onto the prison barge a month ago, they have only felt welcome since they've been in Dorset. And when you compare that with a few months ago, when the No to the Barge group, a horrible race led by racists with friends who are fascists, were having big demonstrations, they were having protests every week. In terms of some lessons about how we've turned that round, I mean, I agree with the speaker from Llanelli. Some people said to us we shouldn't protest and stand up to racism because that was accusing everybody on Portland of being racist. But calling out that group, the leaders of that group, as racist was absolutely key, and that's what has led to them being split. Some of them have been expelled from the group, they've gone underground, they haven't gone away, but they are in a corner and we've got our heads up. But it wasn't just that, because it is more complicated than them just being a small group of fascists. They were our neighbours being led by the racists. And so, as well as calling them out as racist, we had to create an alternative narrative and an alternative leadership. And going in there, having a public meeting where we set up the fantastic network, now they call themselves Portland Global Friendship Group. They've organised to stand up to the racists and call them out, but also to welcome the refugees with flowers and welcome packs, and now a whole series of events. But also, there is real concerns. People talk about these real concerns, and we can't ignore them or join up with the racists in dealing with them, but also leave the racists to deal with them. It's us who fought for bloody Portland Hospital, not the racists, and we haven't had a meeting or a leaflet that hasn't talked about Portland Hospital, and that gives us the basis to blame the government and not the refugees in the future.
Thank you.
Huge amount of scapegoating that of course, Willa Braverman and, of course, now outgoing, replaced by Beverly, have really instilled quite a lot of tax that have emboldened quite a few fascists to really come through into small towns and communities like Elgin, which is where I've been living the last year. And as a very small northeastern town in rural Scotland, kind of sandwiched between Inverness and Aberdeen, we too did see a bit of a problem with fascists trying to mobilise based on exactly what Pinar was talking about in other comment rates. with the hotel accommodation being put in place. It was a plan that was really established about earlier this year for about 45 or so young folks, mainly hailing from the Middle East and also East Africa. And what was happening was a group called the Highland Division had really tried to create a bit of a sympathetic bit of support in the hope that they would find fertile ground using those exact issues that folks like Chantal were talking about, trying to get that sort of sympathetic support of economic or even the cost of living crisis at the moment. And it was a Hitler wannabe, literally, who used to dress in SS uniforms, who was trying to actually get the sort of keynote speech on the 17th of June in a rally that they tried to basically mobilize. However, we were quite quick to respond in terms of stand up to racism up in the Northeast, with cities like Dundee as well as Aberdeen coming together to also organize with the Murray Trades Union Congress, as well as church groups, as well as other community groups who are actually on the ground supporting quite a lot of the folks housed in a hotel known as the 8 And it was our counter rally that only showed up with 8 or so fascists being outnumbered by over 200 of us on a midsummer running along. And what the fascists ended up doing in their very small numbers was unfurling a banner. And I did hear somebody mention the Great Replacement myth earlier. And they had the famous 14 words, which had this exact quote: to secure the existence of our people and a future for our children. And this slogan has always pandered to this very racist myth that somehow people are being replaced by folks from countries that have been terrorized and, of course, settled and occupied by countries like Britain and other Western states. So at least with the solidarity that's really been flowing across the country, we really felt a lot of that spirit, and at least we gave very little space for the far right to build. And if there's anything that I feel like I and all of us are able to take away from all these contributions, even the losses in places unfortunately like Lenachli, is that we have to build these united fronts within those localities and really mobilize under that united front. Because to beat the far right, you've just got to continuously oppose them in the streets so that they completely get snuffed out and have no space to be able to breathe. So for the next set of mobilizations and victories, solidarity is coming from the northeast of Scotland. Thank you.
Evans from Pembrey Report, like 10-15 minutes away from Clelley, where Stradey Park Hotel is. I want to, again, to lead on with what Nimi said, I've been calling out the fascism and racism, everything online, seeing it all online. I've been targeted as a local councillor, of course, targeted by hate groups, setting up petitions against me and lots of other things. But yeah, I've been calling out, been seeing the likes of UKIP turning up, Reform UK turning up at Stradey Park Hotel. We've had, well, the far right groups as well, Patriotic Alternative being there. We've True Believes. A lot of the far right groups have gone down to the likes of Scampton as well, from Clelley up to Scampton, which we know one of the latest. They're taking money from people and stuff. But yeah, it's just crazy to see what's been going on, and been upsetting as well to see that it's going on within the community in the town that never seen the likes of it. So yeah, it's unbelievable.
Thank you.
Hello, I just want to talk about a little town on the south coast called Bexhill. It's a little Tory, very deprived town that they've proposed one of the refugee camps just outside of, which is horrific. And that's a very intentional decision. They've done that somewhere that they believe will take the line that this is somehow the refugees' fault. And they know that because they're never going to convince Hastings, which is just next door and a bit bigger. So they focused on Bexhill. And the thing is that it's not worked. Most of Bexhill has taken a position that slowly with a lot of work from us, has taken the position that this is the fault of the Tories. This is the fault of the cuts that have come to our services, the fact that we've got a housing crisis in the town, and it's because there's more Airbnbs in the town than there are actual rental properties. There was a local fascist group that got set up called No to Northeye that started with about 300 people initially, and because we've mobilised every time they've tried to do anything, especially since August, they've shrunk to around 8 or so. It is significant to talk about the fact that their plans have now changed. The Tories' official position as to what's being done with that camp has moved from being an accommodation centre to an actual refugee prison for any refugees that come across the borders in improper means, I believe is the quote. And I think they're hoping that the town will double down on blaming refugees, and it's going to blow up in their face. The entire town has... It understands that the Tory line is absolute... Can I swear? Crap. And they know the Labour is not much better. We had a public meeting 3 weeks ago in our tiny little Tory safehold of a town, and we had, on a rainy little Monday, in the area where the fascists were trying to grow in the first place, and we had 50 people show up. We had, I think, two of the fascist groups show up that got booed out the room effectively. And I want this to remind everyone that our position in this country is the majority. We are not a country that is accepting the Tory line, and we should not pretend otherwise. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So, our last speaker in the discussion is...
Just to say, I know people have already seen me chairing and whatever, so I hope I won't take up too much time. But yeah, no, I just really wanted to speak about the protests outside the Home Office a couple of weeks ago. I think some of the photos have been coming up on this slideshow, and I think it was a really great demonstration. I think the idea around the protests outside the Home Office, we were working with people I can see in this room as well, from a wide range of groups, from the climate movement, pride groups, obviously as the Start to Racism with Care for Calais and other anti-racist organisations. But I think what we saw there was that Braverman's attacks were so sprawling and so vicious that it really did give us, the one thing she gave us was the opportunity to unite quite a wide to unite wide across the movement to actually say that she's got to go and that refugees are welcome. We think that we can unite a lot of people around those questions, and I think we maybe 100 of us, a couple hundred of us stood outside the Home Office that morning, and then Braverman's gone a couple of weeks later, so that's all it took. That was pretty great. But I think obviously we're seeing her replacements, James Cleverly and whatever, and then David Cameron rising from the dead or what have you. They still want to carry out the same campaign. Obviously Braverman's legacy is still there. They still want to stop the boats, and I think it's obviously a dangerous thing we're seeing when obviously there's the victory with the Rwanda ruling, but Sunak's complete disregard for that, attempting to push back on that and say he's basically going to ignore any, not just the ruling, but any human rights legislation that will get in his way as he tries to deport as many refugees as possible. And I think we've got to talk a little bit. We've got to keep up the fight against these people. Braverman's gone, but we can't rest. But we've got to talk a little bit about the opposition, because in reality they're not presenting anything much better. They're saying that they're going to be more effective at deporting refugees and the rest of it. And I think that's why we can't wait for a general election or the next general election, because I think the reality is as it looks right now, Starmer's Labour is not going to be able to provide anything else for ordinary people. And I think when we look at that and we look at the despair that ordinary people might have when hopefully Labour gets into power and the conditions don't change, that's when we also see these ideas about division, the scapegoating of refugees and so on taking hold as well. So I think it's incredibly important that we're having this conference now, that we'll be protesting outside the Home Office and continuing to resist racism in the here and now, because I think, like people say, that how we fight racism is head on. It's by uniting everyone that agrees with us around these very simple questions to say that racists aren't welcome here. We say that refugees are welcome here, and that we don't ignore the far right when they're attempting to mobilise. We don't run away from the questions or the arguments. Every time the far right, like many people here have been, from around the country fighting those, including me in South East London, we directly take it head on, and we say that actually we are all, as ordinary people and as the working class, united in our interest to saying that refugees are welcome here, and saying that we cannot win if we're divided. So I'll stop there.
Just two takeaways for me, I think. One is that I think it's really been useful that whilst we celebrated some of our successes at the beginning, I thought we heard some really back down to earth contributions about some of the difficulties that we've also encountered. And one of the things that tells me is that we need to absolutely ensure that the links between Stand Up to Racism local groups and the trade union movement are strengthened to ensure that when there is a need quickly to get people mobilised, there are resources that you can call upon to help make that happen. And that's one of the things I took from that, as well as the extraordinary commitment and dedication that people who in some cases have been at this for months with real success are an inspiration to us all. And the final thing, I thought the Italian comrade raised some really important points. And one of the things that really struck me with, given the general elections looming, and I agree that Labour's position on all of this at the moment is very worrying, is that it is also important that our movement does not just stand up in the here and now to combat the far right. That's clearly essential. But I think it is also important that we work up our alternatives to how the current system is run, to be able to explain to those people who are not fascists but are taken in by their divide and rule rhetoric that there is an alternative. And that's why us and Care for Calais developed a safe passage policy, because we didn't just want to say that it's good enough to say no pushbacks and no Rwanda. We actually have to put forward a policy that challenged the criminal gangs. And I think we need to do that with austerity having the effect it's having, with benefit cuts coming, and all the crises that we face. We need to be offering people an alternative to ensure that we win those arguments with people on the ground. And certainly I've found this morning's discussion really quite inspirational. So thanks very much. And from a PCS perspective, I'm sure on behalf of our delegation and NEC, we commit to continuing to work with Stand Up to Racism in the years ahead for what is a critical battle. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks again for all the support. Pinar now.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think for me it's been amazing to hear messages of solidarity and what everyone has been doing across the country. And what I've noticed is the pattern that the far right has been using since January, February of this year, with especially organising around hotel accommodations and the fact that they have feared the solidarity in the community and the way that we have been upholding people's rights, and the fact that because of this fear, they have been attacking the most vulnerable in our communities, and feels like if they are being organised, we are 10 times more organised than the far right and the fascists. So we need to be organised more in our communities. And I think another pattern that we need to do is we need to be organised with joy and fun and solidarity. And we need to remember those joy, that's what Roy was explaining in the hotels that we've been outside, and within the work that we do is people's experiences at the centre, people's joy, people's stories at the centre, and also to do this work with care. I think that's really important, that it's a lot for all of us, it's a lot for the community, and the racists and the fascists know that it is a lot for all of us. So the care and the solidarity we need to provide for each other is vital, and that with this care and solidarity, hopefully we will be able to defeat the Tories. Well, that's the long-term aim, but first we get rid of the racists and the fascists in our communities, and remember that as communities we are much more stronger united than the rest of the racists and the fascists. So yeah, I'm sending more solidarity, and please do check out the Lift the Ban campaign, and if anyone's interested to have another campaign looking at free bus travel and across the country, I'd be more than happy to chat with anyone about this. And yeah, just remember, for all of us to remember that the policies of the Tories affects all of us, not just asylum seekers and refugees. They will attack the vulnerable, the most vulnerable, and then they will attack everyone's rights, like they are doing with our trying to attack our human rights and trying to take the UK out of the European Court of Human Rights, and also challenging the European Court of Human Rights as well. It's one of the most I would say worrying thing for all of us as individuals are right. So I'm sending solidarity one more time, and let's defeat the racists and the fascists with care, love and joy.
Thanks so much, Fiona. And finally we'll hand over to Steve to...
Still on sea, so thank you for that. The hatred is being stoked. In 2002, the number of asylum claims were more than they are in 2022. There wasn't a big deal being made about it then. This is manufactured. It's to take the eyes of the public off of things like a failing NHS, ambulance times, inflation, cost of living crisis, fuel crisis, you name it, all those other crises. This is entirely manufactured. We are the majority. That was the one comment I got from the floor that I really liked. We are the majority. Compassion, humanity and decency will win out. I just know that. Thank you.
Thanks so much to all our panel. Thank you, Steve. So just a